Hi, everybody. I am recording this video lecture tonight. It's actually Tuesday night, February 4th. Just in case we end up getting snowed out of class tomorrow, I wanted to make sure that we had all the information shared together, especially since I didn't see you all on Monday since I was sick. So I'm going to be doing this quick video lecture about organization and outlining that will help you get ready to turn in your informative speech outline. On Friday, we will have a workshop on the outlines, but I wanted to give you some discussion of what to expect and what you should be planning to do for class that day, and more broadly speaking, for the outline assignment. So let's start just by kind of walking you through the expectations for what makes for good, solid organization and outlining in a speech outline. There are several different ways that you can organize ideas. Most commonly, we're going to talk about this from both informative and persuasive strategies. For this class, we'll focus on topical organization, chronological organization, spatial organization, cause and effect, and problem solution. For the informative speech, typically the first four, really the first three, are the ones that I would recommend. Topical organization refers to grouping your ideas based around different topics or different subjects. This could also be called categorical categories, different categories of information. So for example, you might be giving a speech about your favorite baseball team, and you want to talk about star players, you want to talk about the mascot, and you want to talk about the stadium that they use. Those are different categories of information. They don't really relate to each other in any other way except for through the fact that they're connected to the topic of your favorite baseball team. So that would be how you would be organizing main ideas for topical or categorical here. This is a very fine pattern to use, especially if this is your first time putting together a speech outline. Usually by the time we move on to the second and third speeches in our class, I start trying to encourage students to move away from this pattern, but for this speech, it's perfectly fine. The next pattern is chronological, and that is organizing ideas based in some kind of time or sequence pattern. So think beginning to end, right? I'm going to talk about, let's say the topic is the Civil War. You talk about what led up to the Civil War, what happened during the Civil War, and what happened after the Civil War. That is a chronological pattern. Again, the idea is that you're arranging your main points based on time. Spatial is the next pattern that you can use. Spatial refers to organizing your ideas as they exist in space. So this isn't space like outer space, but space is in physical space. The example I like to use is, let's say you're giving a speech about bones in the human body, and you start by talking about bones in the head and chest. And then you talk about bones in the arms and hands, right? And then you finish up with bones in the legs and feet. You are talking about these different topics based on their relationship to space, how they exist, with each other in a physical space. To talk about cause and effect, we will talk about this more whenever we get to persuasive speaking, but cause and effect is what it sounds like. You talk about the cause of a problem. For example, you could be talking about vaping, the cause or health factors related to vaping. Vaping causes, or you would spend the first main point talking all about what you know to be true about vaping, and what kind of chemicals you're breathing in, and so on and so forth. And then the effect of that would be the health effects that have been proven to relate to that. I know that that's not a topic that has been studied as much. An easier comparison would probably be like smoking. Smoking, you take in different carcinogens and other toxins, and then the effect leads to lung cancer, COPD, other chronic lung illnesses. But that's cause and effect. And there are some instances where you can use it for informative speaking, but I think it really does work better for persuasive speaking. Problem solution is another pattern. This is where you explain what a problem is and you present the solution for it. So the problem could be Getting the flu, a hard flu season. A solution could be practicing safe health measures like washing your hands a lot and, not sharing food with people. Okay, there are some other patterns I want to introduce. These aren't as common, but if you're feeling a little adventurous, or maybe you're like, none of these really fit what I want to talk about for my speech, you can use a narrative pattern. This is similar to chronological in the sense that it does tend to usually have some kind of thread of a beginning, middle, and end, but this is more about storytelling. So this works really well if you are giving a speech about a person. Right? You tell the beginning of their lives, the middle of their lives, the end of their lives. So again, you're focusing more on the storytelling aspects here versus just events as they occurred, in history. Comparison is another pattern you can use. Let's say that you are giving a speech about different kinds of healthy foods to eat, and you're going to compare and contrast what those look like. Here's the difference between foods with processed sugar and natural sugar, right? The last pattern would be advantages, disadvantages. This works well if for an informative speech, as long as you keep it balanced and you're not trying to necessarily make an argument. So think of pro con. I'm going to give a topic, and one of my main points is going to be the pros or advantages, and the other main point is going to be cons or disadvantages. So this could be really anything that you want to talk about. Let's say what it's like to be a school bus driver. There are advantages and there are disadvantages, and you kind of talk about each of those. And for an informative speech, it's important to keep them balanced. For a persuasive speech, we can do something a little different, but again, we'll talk about that whenever we get to the persuasive unit. That would be more of what's called a comparative advantage. So those are the different patterns that I wanted to introduce to you. Obviously, as we're workshopping this on Friday, I can help you flesh out your ideas. Now, where this comes into play really is in the body of your speech. Outlines effectively are the written version of your organizational pattern. And your intro and conclusion have to be pretty solid for what I require for this class, but the body of your speech is where you get to be a little bit more creative. And that's where I want to see that organizational pattern become more apparent. So let me walk you through the requirements of your outline. Every outline needs to have 3 solid parts: an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. And I'm going to walk you through each of those parts to explain what I want within each of those parts of the outline. First of all, your introduction needs to have 5 different sections. That sounds like a lot, but your introduction needs to be a good percentage of your speech. For example, if you're going to speak for 5 minutes, I think it's okay for your intro to be about a minute long. You really got to spend some time setting up the topic, getting your audience comfortable with it, and getting them encouraged and excited to listen to your speech. So the first thing, the absolute must be, the very first part of your outline, is your attention getter. This is where you signal to your audience, hey, I'm getting ready to talk and this is going to be an awesome speech. So you probably don't say that exactly, but you want to get their attention in some way. And this should be more than just saying, hi, my name is Sarah and I'm going to talk to you about Super Mario Brothers, right? But it should be something kind of exciting, like the world's fastest record for completing Super Mario Brothers 2 from beginning to end was 15 minutes and 47 seconds. I don't actually know if that's true, but it sounded pretty good. The idea being that you're using some kind of compelling fact or a question or a statement or a quote or something like that, something to get your audience's attention while also kind of alluding to the topic more specifically. So the attention getter has to come first. After that, I generally suggest that you pretty quickly introduce what the topic is, as well as, why you're qualified to talk about it, why your audience should care. And that's where these 3 next parts kind of come into play. And really you can organize them in a way that makes sense for your speech. So you need to establish credibility, explain your WIFA, or what's in it for the audience statement, and provide a thesis statement for the speech. When you establish credibility, what you're doing is saying to the audience, hey, here's the research I've done on this topic. Here's my expertise on it. Here's why I'm qualified to talk. This can be as straightforward as saying, I've done research on this topic for this speech. It could be more complicated. If you have a more personal connection to the topic, you can explain what your relationship to the topic is. For example, I've played Super Mario Brothers my entire life and consider myself to be quite good at the video game. But whatever it is, you want to just explain to your audience why they should take the time to listen to you specifically talk about the speech. Now, the next part is about why they should listen to the speech as it relates to them. Well, why should I care about listening to you talk about Super Mario Brothers? Okay, well, Super Mario Brothers is a cultural phenomenon, and if you've never played it before, it's a great way to get into video games if you're, not very good like Sarah. So the idea is that you're telling them why this speech matters to them and kind of what they can take away from it. Which of course also leads into the thesis. The thesis, as we've talked about in class, is it answers the question, what can your audience expect to get out of the speech? So tell them clearly, tell them specifically, after listening to this presentation today, I hope that you'll have a much bigger understanding of the cultural impact of Super Mario Brothers on video games over the past 20, 30 years or whatever, right? You just explain to them, again, a very kind of specific overview of what they can expect. Now, the very last part of your introduction is your preview. It's important to me that you do your thesis first and then your preview sentence. And your preview should clearly state the main points in your speech. It's really a preview of main points, right? Your thesis is a broader overview than your preview of main points. Your preview of main points is going to explicitly and clearly state, today I will tell you about my first main point, my second main point, and my third main point. Except for in your outline, you'll actually say what those main points are. And I think that that needs to go very last. If your attention getter goes very first in the speech and then your outline, the preview goes very last in your introduction. Okay, so that's the first part, the introduction. Well, then you get to move on to the body of the speech. Now, for these presentations, time really dictates that you need 2 to 3 main points. You don't need more than that. You don't have time to cover more than 3 main points. Each main point, as we talked about in class, you want them to be relatively equal in importance, and you want them to all relate directly to the thesis. So make sure that you are keeping that in mind as you work on crafting the body of the outline. This is where the most variance is going to come in from outline to outline. Some things that you need to make sure that you do, though, between each main point, you have to include a transition sentence. Your transition sentence is effectively a sentence that says, here's what I just talked about, and here's what I'm going to talk about next. And it can really be as straightforward as that. Now that I've told you about the cultural phenomenon that Super Mario Brothers had in the United States in the 80s, I'm going to tell you about what Super Mario Brothers looked like during the 1990s. Okay, doesn't have to be super flashy. You can certainly write it more kind of eloquently than that, but it just needs to connect the previous main point to the next main point. Another thing that's really important to me is that you include no more than 1 sentence per item. I'll explain more so what I mean by item, but basically anytime you have a main point, a sub point, a supporting point underneath that, it should be no more than 1 sentence long. The exception to that is if you have a direct quote that is multiple sentences. And really, I would try to limit those as much as you could, try to paraphrase instead. But when you do have any kind of citation, any kind of reference, make sure that you fully write out what you intend to say. So I have an example here. According to a 2017 article published in the highly reputable journal, Sarah TMG Knows Everything, author Turner McGowan explains that dogs are far superior pets over cats. So I have a fully written citation. It includes the source information. It includes what I got from that article. It's got about 4 different pieces of information from that article in that citation, right? So it's written out very clearly. There's no mistaking that it's a citation, right? The idea whenever you do a verbal citation and a written citation is that you're giving credit to where that information came from. It doesn't need to be a guessing game. It should be very clearly stated, especially in a speech when your audience really only has the opportunity to hear what you're saying one time. All right, so that's the body of the outline. Again, this is the part where you get to really show off which organizational pattern you're using and kind of control a lot more of what the outline looks like. But after you've done that, then it's time to move on to the conclusion. The conclusion needs to be ordered in this way. I don't think switching it around any helps. But you start first with a review of main points. So the review of the main points should be a mirror opposite of what you did for your preview. If in the preview you said, I'm going to tell you about my first main point, and then my second main point, and then my third main point, your review should say, today I told you about my first main point, my second main point, and my third main point. Now, if you're feeling fancy, you could do it backwards. You could say, oh, today I told you about my third main point, my second main point, and my first main point. But the point is that you are clearly stating what each of those main points are. Think about it this way. Your audience may have forgotten what you talked about in the beginning of your speech. It's your job as a speaker to help remind them what that was. Now, after you've done that, you've just very clearly stated it, you can fluff out and kind of develop your conclusion a little bit more, but you do have to make sure you include some form of a restated thesis, meaning remind your audience of what they should have gotten out of the speech that they just listened to. It does not need to be word for word, exact copy and paste of your thesis, but what it needs to be is remind your audience of that question, well, what was I supposed to get out of this speech today? So now that you've listened to this presentation, you too know a lot more about Super Mario Brothers and the impact that it has had on video games in the United States and around the world. Right? So it's not exactly the same, but it's reminding your audience of what the big picture was of the presentation. The very last thing you say in your speech is your clincher. And your clincher should be something that kind of sticks in your audience's mind and leaves with them a lasting impression. If your attention getter was like a cool statistic or fact or quote, your clincher can be something similar to that. It can be a rhetorical question. Now, doesn't everybody want to go out and buy Super Mario Brothers to play with their friends this weekend? You know, it can be a call to action where you tell them to go do something. But the idea is that it helps your speech stick in the minds of your audience after they've finished listening to you. So that makes up your conclusion. And like I said, it can have more than those 3 parts, but it needs to, at minimum, have those 3 parts. At the very end of your outline, you'll do a page break in Word, meaning that you'll create a new page in that same document. It just skips down several spaces no matter where you are in the page, and you will create your reference sheet. And your reference sheet should say references at the top, centered, and then it should have in APA citation or in APA format each of the sources that you found and have used in your speech written out. Okay? That is a really important part. We'll talk about that on Friday, but I just want to make sure that you know you do have to have a reference sheet attached to the end of the outline. So before we get to kind of the end things here, I wanted to show you a sample outline that you could use. So this is shared on Blackboard for you to look at, but you have an idea here of the order and the structure of how I expect your outlines to look like. This is one that I wrote. You can see that each item, this is an item, this is an item, this is an item, you know, this is an item here, this is an item here. The idea being each separate little point in your outline is no more than 1 sentence. You can see that citations, verbal citations, are clearly spelled out. My main points are roughly balanced, right? There are transition sentences between each main point, and there's a conclusion. Then I start on a new page, and there's my references in APA format, okay? So that just gives you an idea visually of what an outline should look like. If you would like, you can also access this informative speech outline worksheet, which you can also access on Blackboard by looking at our informative speech outline assignment link on Blackboard. Download it, fill it in, change it, make it work. I've even got a couple of notes here like, do not put anything here. Well, that means like, don't write out this topic will be blah, 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 blah. It's just there as kind of a placeholder, okay? I have another note there. You can adjust your main points, subpoints, and sub-subpoints as necessary. Oh, excuse me. I'm up past my bedtime. You can explain what your make sure that you write what your transition sentences will be. And I have a little explanation of what those are. And again, this worksheet is for you to use, change, and then I've got a little reminder to put your reference sheet at the end of it there. Okay. So a couple of reminders before we see each other again. I do want you to go ahead and get an idea, get a kind of a head start on your outline, but make sure that on Friday you bring something to class that lets you work on them. So that's what we're doing on Friday. I'm hoping that by giving you this extra time, you will have your outlines absolutely ready to go Monday with no delays. But come to class if you need to have it saved to like your student L drive or whatever it's called, to a flash drive, to Dropbox cloud, whatever you have, email it to yourself. Make sure you can access a document to work on during class on Friday. For our 10 o'clock class, we're going to meet in John Vaughn Library 118A. For the 12 o'clock class, we're going to meet in Business and Technology in 129. And for my 1 o'clock class, we're going to meet in the Science Building 270. So we're just going to be all over campus on Friday. And just as another reminder, these are due Monday before class. So hopefully this wasn't, too long for you, but still gave you some information that you need to be able to complete the assignment. And we didn't get too far behind with another snow day this semester. I hope you all are staying warm and bundled up, regardless of whether campus is open or closed. This may be recorded just for fun, but if not, hope you all enjoyed getting this extra information. And please let me know if you have any questions or concerns. Stay safe and stay warm.